I am live. Okay, then I'm just going to, I'm going to do a bit of a practice run for myself by going live. What I want to look at is because Paul Vander Klay and some other people, etc., are going to Kildare in Ireland, where they're going to also be attending this St. Bridget Connected event. And I want to give some background color on what the Ireland of that time looks like. And I'm going to be using this book. This is a wonderful book I read as a youngster. The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, W. Evans Wentz, an American man who went to Ireland in the 1890s and 1910s and all around the Celtic world, collecting folklore and stories of the fairy faith and the pagan religion of the Celts, right, which is still fairly predominant in the 1910s, 1920s. It's prevalent, not predominant. Hey, Matt, how are you doing? Matt, do you want to jump on? Anyway, or do whatever you want, Dave. You're always welcome. Everybody's welcome. Well, not everybody. A lot of people are welcome. So it's I want to do a quick bit of review of, or just to read a few extracts. Cool, man. You'll be welcome. A few extracts of this book about the fairy faith, and it gives a sense of what the Ireland of the 5th century was at the time of Bridget, and how this kind of plays into the complexities of how Ireland interacts with pagan traditions and religion throughout the centuries. This is Standish O'Grady. He's a historian from Ireland back in the day. So firm was the hold with which the ethnic gods of Ireland had taken upon the imagination and spiritual sensibilities of our ancestors that even the monks and Christianized bards never thought of denying the Celtic gods. They doubtless forbade the people to worship them, but to root out the belief in their existence was so impossible that they could not even dispossess their own minds of the conviction that the gods were real supernatural beings. One of the stories that's interesting in that regard is that in 1014, a king of Ireland, the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, leads an army against the Vikings and defeats the Vikings in the Battle of Clontarf. Breaks Viking power in Ireland. Also represents, one of the turning points of the Viking power in northwestern Europe. But there's a poem about the event, and in the poem, who lines out right beside the Christian Irish, 6 centuries of Christianity in the Irish at that stage, but all the Celtic gods line out in the battle array right beside the Irish. So you read it in all the stories about how the gods march, come blasting through on their horses, and who would have transferred those stories? Both monks. So there is something very unusual about that where in some of the Greek myths, it seems, and the Roman traditions, there was a bit of a pushback against the retention of those stories, and many of those stories survived simply either through the Byzantium route or through the preservation of Latin as a language of learning, and these were the things that people wanted. It is a bit like Ragnarok, right? And the terrible thing about that battle, Matt, is that the old king Brian, he dies, and then his son dies, and then his grandson die all in the same day. So you've got like 3 generations of the one royal family die in the same day, and he is the man who united the whole country. So it actually leads to a type of Ragnarok, because thereafter there is no royal family left, and that's it. We're all it's civil war then for like 100 years until the neighbors come knocking, and a new thing starts, like the death of Saul. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know enough about that. I need to learn more about that. So it's a good prompt. It's a good prompt. The people of the goddess Dana, or according to Darbois, the people of the god whose mother was called Dana, are the Tuatha De Danann of the ancient mythology of Ireland. The goddess Dana, called in the genitive the Danand in Middle Irish, was named Bridget. So that's a connection to Saint Bridget in a way, right? And in exactly the same way as the pagan cult once bestowed on the spirits in wells and fountains has now been transferred to Christian saints, to whom the wells and fountains have been rededicated, so to Saint Bridget as a national saint has been transferred to the pagan cult rendered to her predecessor. It's worth bearing in mind that actually St. Patrick is the person that people think is the patron saint of Ireland, but Ireland has three patron saints, and one of them is St. Bridget. Thus, even yet, as in the case of the minor divinities of their sacred fountains, the Irish people, through their veneration for the good St. Bridget, render homage to the divine mother of the people who bear her name, Dana, who are the ever-living, invisible fairy people of modern Ireland. For when the sons of Mill, the ancestors of the Irish people, came to Ireland, they found the Tuatha De Danann, the gods, in full possession of the country. The Tuatha De Danann then retired before the invaders, the Irish, without, however, giving up their sacred island. Assuming invisibility, with the power at any time reappearing in a human form before the children of the sons of Mill, the Irish, the people of the goddess Dana became the fairy folk, the she of Irish mythology and romance. Therefore, it is today that Ireland contains two peoples, a race visible, which we call the Celts, and a race invisible, which we call the fairies. It's worth mentioning that in terms of Irish mythology, that the fairies are not like the depictions of the 19th century fairies of English folklore, which are like, little Tinkerbell type things. No, these are more badass kind of characters, more evocative of the elves of Tolkien. The Sidhe, who are known as the gentry, have kindred elsewhere in Ireland, Scotland, and probably in most countries, such as the invisible races of the Yosemite Valley, have been described more or less accurately by our peasant seer witnesses from County Sligo and the north and east of Ireland. But there are other and probably more reliable seers in Ireland, and to such seer Celts as these, death is a passport to the world of the Sidhe, a world where there is eternal youth and never-ending joy, as we shall learn when we study in the Celtic otherworld. This is what's known as Tír na nÓg in Ireland, the land of youth. The recorded mythology and literature of ancient Ireland preserved to us clear pictures of the Tuatha De Danann, so that disregarding some Christian influences in the text of certain manuscripts, we can easily describe the people of the goddess Dana as they appeared in pagan days, when they were more frequently seen by mortals than now. That's an interesting idea, right? That somehow or other there is some potential in earlier peoples to be able to interact with the transcendent in a way that is lost to us. I have been looking a small bit at some of the romantics and trying to find a way of exploring that, and that's kind of been leading me into Barfield. I missed the Barfield wave of the early days. It just never spoke to me, but now I'm beginning to get a feel for it, right? And I watched one of an early video from Paul from 7 years ago about Owen Barfield, where a friend of his, John, had sent a letter, and that was my wife's coming downstairs, and that was a letter of about Barfield, where he talked about collective representation, the pattern of how we, without speaking about it, come to an image of the world, right? And it makes me wonder that did the older generations, did older people have a different collective representation, which would have allowed them to be able to explore and see some of these things, which is a kind of a cool idea. Now, perhaps the Irish folk of the olden times were even more clairvoyant and spiritual minded than the Irish folk of today. So by drawing upon these written records, let us try to understand what sort of beings the Sidhe were and are. In the Book of Leinster, will I do this bit? I will do. No, I won't. I'll jump on to this part. A passage in the Silver Gaelica not only tends to explains that the Irish people made a clear distinction between the gods and their own people. In the colloquy with the ancients, St. Patrick and Caillte are talking with one another, when a lone woman robed in mantle of green, a smock of soft silk beneath her skin, next to her skin, and on her forehead a glittering plate of yellow gold, came to them, And when Patrick asked from whence she came, she replied, out of Uav Cruachna, or the cave of Crochan. Caoilte then asked, woman, my soul, who art thou? I am Scuníomh, or Flower Lust, daughter of the Tagda's son Bob Derg. Caoilte proceeded, and how did you get here? To require of thee my marriage gift, because once upon a time thou promised me such. And as they talked, Patrick broke in, St. Patrick, it's a wonder to see how you too, the girl young and invested with all comeliness, beauty, but thou, Caoilte, a withered ancient, bent in the back and dingily grown grey. But it's no wonder at all, said Caoilte, for no people of one generation or of one time are we. She is of the Tuatha De Danann, who are unfading, and whose duration is perennial. I am the sons of Milesius, that are perishable and fade away. So she is one of the goddess. She's like the wife of Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings, right? She is unperishing. But Caoilte, in his youth, was had promised that he would marry her, or did marry her and didn't pay the promise of this marriage gift. But he has, of course, grown old. The exact distinction is between Caoilte, a withered old ancient, and it may be even a ghost, because it seems that Patrick may have questioned him and raised him up from the dead in order to be able to find out the past history of Ireland. But the woman is one of the she, or the Tuatha De Danann. Before Caoilte appears, Patrick is chanting mass and pronouncing benediction on the fort in which Fionn McCool, a great leader of Irish mythology, had been killed, the draw of Drumderg. This chanting and benediction act magically as a means of calling up the ghosts of the other Fianna. For, as the text continues, thereupon the clerics saw Caoilte and his band draw near them, and fear fell on them before the tall men with the huge wolf dogs, and accompanied them, for they were not people of one time or one place with the clergy. Then heaven's distinguished one, that pillar of dignity and angel on earth, Calpurn's son, Patrick, apostle of the Gael, the Irish, rose and took the aspergillum to sprinkle holy water on the great men, asperges mehe, floating over whom until that day there had been and were now 1,000 legions of demons, into the hills and scalps, into the outer borders of the region and of the country, the demons forthwith departed in all directions. After which the enormous men sat down. Here, undoubtedly, we observe a literary method of rationalizing the ghosts of the Fianna, and their sudden and mysterious coming and personal aspects can be compared with the sudden and mysterious comings and personal aspects of the Tuatha De Danann. So one of the things there that's kind of interesting to see is that the clergy in like many of these stories would have been written down in medieval times, like the 9th century and maybe a bit later, but they're all tracing back, right? These are old tales, right? Really old tales. And imagine the modern church arguing or putting forward the idea that a mass could be used to summon the ghosts of the dead so that you could have a discussion with them. I don't see it taken off, right? And yet this is regarded as basic stuff in Irish manuscripts of the 10th and 11th century. It's like, well, obviously, right? Nobody even questions it or changes the story, because part of the history of Ireland is captured through St. Patrick talking to these dead Fenian warriors, because the only way to access this golden age in Ireland is to pull out from the past the stories of the dead. So it's a bit like Odysseus going into the underworld. It's a bit like Aeneas going down into his underworld. Somehow or other, Patrick does the same thing and jumps the gap between the Ireland of the 5th century and the Ireland of the heroic cycles, which is around the 1st to the 2nd century AD. So that gives a sense of what it means. And one of the things which is kind of interesting to see is that this kind of embodiment of mythology in Irish locality assumes a kind of a central is very physical. So when the gods retreat from the world of this world, they move into the forts, caves, hills, places that were probably sacred into the old religion, into the sea, into the lakes. And then there becomes a kind of a jockeying of function, so that wells, certain mountains, certain paths, valleys, all become dual places where you have the well of, like, so in my part of Ireland, one of the Saint Ida is a goddess. Ida was a goddess, but there's also Saint Ida, right? Now, Ida might have been a name as common as Muck. Every second person might have been called it, right? But or maybe there's a transference where the kind of the chthonic, what I called in the Catholic and the Christian, right? Where this living in the caves, these people of the underworld, these people of the embodied landscape, overlay with the Christians and the saints, right? So that there are wells in every corner of Ireland, predominantly in the center and the west, actually less so in the east because of history, but has wells dedicated to something like St. Bridget, to innumerous saints and other places. And these were all areas of local devotion, which is quite non-managerial. If you think of the managerial state as being something that kind of it created, and became much more powerful in the 1950s, you could imagine a type of institutionalism or managerial state which looked at the presence of wells as something outside of the remit of the church. Now, the church was very focused on the wells and stuff like that, but I wonder, was there a tension? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out. Was there a tension between the church maintaining the wells and other sacred sites as places of worship, or was it that the church itself, the physical building, always had to become the centralizing position? And I think there's a kind of a subtle, Vatican II kind of shift after that happens, and that's also the modernization of Ireland, where the wells just begin to fade away. And now, I think people probably don't even know where the wells are, which is a sad and tragic loss of connection to our history and to the overlay of religion onto the physical landscape, right? Onto the actual landscape, not an imaginarium of the world and kind of seeing this is sacred or seeing that is sacred, but everybody agreeing that hill is sacred, right? Independent of any church or building, right? And this probably connects with the history of Ireland as well, where you had during the penal times the suspension of Catholicism. I mean, Catholicism was pretty much de facto banned in Ireland, as it was elsewhere in the so-called United Kingdom for a long period of time, but with a certain amount of extreme prejudice, as the saying goes, in Ireland, so that there were no churches, right? So people would attend masses at rocks, and these are the mass rocks of Irish landscape. There are certain places where you go it's a mass that would be at the rock. It was just a known place where people could assemble and keep a watch for soldiers and make sure that the priest could escape in due time. Hello, Metsi. Oh, very nice. Hey, how are you doing, man? How are you keeping? So that kind of overlay of Matt Skankenstein. Okay. Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
How are you?
Wait a minute.
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I'm roasting. It's about 25 degrees in 26 or 27 degrees in Europe. So we're all
I have no idea what that means.
Oh yeah, right. It's not too heavy. It's about like 80. I don't know. It's about 84, 85 Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's about right.
Yeah. So it's hot, but it's not. It's not where you guys would think hot, right? But for us,
right.
For us Europers, it's tough.
Yeah, well, that's half the reason I left Virginia for the Pacific Northwest. Is 80 to 85 is about as bad as it gets for most of the year.
Okay, yeah, that's actually that can be okay with a bit of a nice breeze and plenty of rain there as well, right? So it's always going to be a bit a bit fresh.
Yes. It is absolutely green all of the time. It's wonderful. And also higher latitudes too. I don't know. Kind of curious about the topographical comparison between you and I, frankly. For the
Yeah, you must be a bit lower because if I recall correctly, Ireland and therefore approximately Holland is on the same line as Toronto and a bit just below Newfoundland. So I think you're basically on the same latitude as like the Rhode Island and all those places, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so I think that's a good bit below. That's a good bit below us. Here would be probably like another 200 or 300 miles below.
No, I remember being shocked. Friends of mine were going to visit like Ireland or Scotland, and they're just, yeah, no, just so you know, like it's about the same latitude as Alaska. And I'm like, I guess that is how globes work, but you'd never picture that.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't, right? And just the weather is because there's the Gulf Stream which circulates warm air around the Atlantic, and that keeps us all toasty in Ireland, you know.
Yeah. I was fascinated what you're saying about the wells, although I think I didn't quite catch. I've heard them talked about, but don't quite know like what the wells are. Like, what can you retread that for me for a second, just because I'm curious?
Yeah. So like a well is basically like, you know, where a spring where water just bubbles through. So typically it's where the water bubbles through. Like what you would think of as a well is often like, you know, the circular and the bricks all down in the buckets.
Right.
It's not like one of those. It's more like just a place where water bubbles up. And usually what I've seen them, they're built out with stone. It's very low, and then you have steps down to it, and then people just get water. And they used to, you know, bless themselves and attend themselves, right? And often back in the old days, there would have been mythology and folklore associated with those particular stories and wells, right? But that a lot of that has been lost now. You'd have to really dive into folklore books to be able to track that.
Yeah, I think Paul Kingsnorth on his Substack has been kind of chasing them down, I want to say.
Yeah, I'm sure he has, right? Because there's at least 3 or 4 that I can think of, but where I'm from and where my wife is from. And I'm sure there's more that I could easily get to, you know. And they used to be associated as well with like mountains, not just the hills, but the mountains. So people would actually go to certain trees and then tie little ribbons on trees on certain days, right? So there was this rich kind of liturgy of place throughout the year, you know, and it was like there was a kind of a filling in, Matt, of some of the things that maybe Christianity was potentially less focused on or less forthright about. Kind of got a bit of freedom through the whole paganism stuff.
Yeah. So this is what makes it so interesting, because the first kind of thing, sort of like in my kind of like mental architecture, is I'm hearing you describe something like, you know, if you read through like the books of Kings and Chronicles, the big thing they're always worried about is like local cult shrines, Asherah poles, and stuff like that. Yeah. And on the one hand, like they are uniformly condemned throughout like the Book of Kings and Chronicles, but you don't seem to have quite that. I don't know if like those sorts of kind of practices are different post-Christian versus pre-Christian in the life of Israel or not, but
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'd have to read books of Kings and Chronicles, right? First, but like all these practices were fairly well integrated into Christianity. Like, I mean, I think one of the things that like is remarkable about Ireland as other places in Europe is, like, you know, we've been Christian since the 4th century, right? 432, right? So it's been going on for quite a while. So these were all fairly bedded in, and it also seems that what I kind of find strange is there seems to have been no desire to overwrite all of the information and force it on people and kind of go drop all that and just have take all this, right? It was like, okay, tone this down a small bit, but do what you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matsi asks, are wells a liminal space? Yeah, I think they are, Matt, because Matsi, because like so in and like going back into Celtic mythology again as well, right? And like in this book, the Evan Wells book, which I put down randomly, and yeah, here we go. This cool book by this American dude. He talks about how wells are regarded as places of moving from this world to the other world, and there's stories about how people are drawn into the water, right, as if called. You know, you've like these very dark pools of still water, and that there's stories about people who are called into the water and basically travel to the underworld, right? Aka, you know, die, and then they go into the underworld through the water. So water is a type of liminal or transitional space between this world and the other world. And I suppose then it's the same as there's probably like like it's a fountain. It's a place of baptism, perhaps as well. I've not heard that the fountain, these wells were used for baptism, but it wouldn't surprise me that if they could be, you know.
I feel like that sort of thing would be the real, like one of those, you know, kind of as you're trying to figure out how Christianity interacts and doesn't interact with what has gone on before in Ireland. I feel like that's one of those main sites of like conflict, or at least like fierce debate. Like, do we baptize them here at these indigenous sacred spaces, or do we bring them into the church building and do it in the baptismal font?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there was a lot of mix with that. I'm just guessing based off the way that people are.
Yeah. I guess the thing is, like, you know, the indigenous spaces. So, like, one of the things there when Patrick comes, somehow or other, it's important enough that he call up the spirit of the old the original Irish to hear the story of the land, right? And like, the story doesn't kind of go, they were doing all this type of crazy stuff, and then Patrick came. It's like there's some recognition in early Ireland that story isn't going to be fulfilling enough to fill out the kind of communal notion of how the Irish people feel about themselves, to just simply become, you know, Western European Christians. Like, because, you know, there's this annoying idea that nation states, the idea of a nation state got created in the 19th century. And I mean, maybe the theory of the idea of a nation state got created in the 19th century, but certainly the nation didn't get created in the 19th century, because throughout Irish history, there's a very strong notion of people regarding themselves as the Gael. You know, we are the Gael, we are the Irish people. And even if they're all from different tribes, all warring with each other, they regard themselves as having a separate cultural identity, language, tradition, history throughout the whole time. And one of the things I find really strange is that, like, how could it be that 6 centuries after we've been Christianized, we're still writing poetry where the Celtic gods are central to like all of the great victories that we have over the Vikings? I mean, that's right. There's no kind of like Constantine at I was going to say the Battle of Stamford Bridge, but the Battle of whatever bridge he's at, right, where he raises the cross in Hoc Signo and gets everybody rocking, right? What would be going on there? And is there anything like that in America?
Well, that gets into the question of like what is the folk indigenous beliefs of America, which is really, I mean, it kind of depends on the guest. Of course, we've got our own native populations.
Yeah.
But we weren't especially kind to them and kind of drove them into their own little like sequestered corners. And so there's this. I don't know. It's a question like, what do Americans believe in? Is it, or what do we all sort of like agree on? What was the phrase you used earlier that really kind of captured me? The sorts of things where, like, I know the church knew, like, you couldn't tell the people to stop believing these things. The best you could do is be like, well, just stop worshiping them, but kind of like, you know, just deal with them as best you can, but don't put them at the top of the hierarchy. Just kind of like, yeah, we're not gonna try and banish or abolish them.
Yeah, but is that like a kind of an explicit recognition of existence, right? that they just go, well, obviously they're there, right? But the whole game is not to get carried away by that, but by, so that's like the UFOs thing, right? That's the that's the wrestling din of like what is there. Although I don't quite get the unidentified flying, the UAVs and this UFOs and all this type of dialogue at the moment. It's not quite.
I'm a bit of a loss as well, frankly, and I don't know how much to. But it's weird because I mean, probably in the last like 5-10 years, I've kind of shifted from, I don't know, something more like kind of like a new atheist or like very materialist kind of Christian assumption that like God's on the top of the throne and there's just nothing else. The entire rest of like the immaterial cosmos is empty and void. To more after reading things like Charles Taylor and kind of realizing like, okay, like I have a certain sort of, and at least like tacit assumption that like the Irish were dealing with particular beings, the Greeks were dealing with, something that they called Thor, and there's a there. Which I, as a kid just assumed like, no, these are just stories that they made up to explain why thunder is scary and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so the question is like, what are the UFOs doing? I don't even know. Like the fact that they are technological folklore is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and is that the mythologizing of like the predominant narrative in the kind of the rationalist kind of technological narrative? Somehow or other has got a little seed, almost like the Matrix. It's within it, and it's beginning to propagate within it, and it's beginning to vibrate, and it's beginning to break out of the container, right? So that now to believe in the UFO, which is an outworking of technology, right, is suddenly drifting into hierarchical ways of looking at the world.
Right. It's no longer fringe. It's no longer being officially ignored by folks in power, I guess. So it's in a sense like because it's being epistemically recognized, it's becoming more real. It's part of the like re-enchanting, like when in our disenchanting mode, we're like, no, those aren't real. We're not going to make decisions based off of, sacred spots where aliens hit. But I've heard stories of like, even as late as like the 40s or the 50s, where like fairy sites have disrupted Irish road construction and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, so there's lots of stories about, fairy sites or forts, and forts then end up becoming places of where the fairies are in possession as well, right? Because they all represent the time from before, right? Like they're all from about the 9th century, the 2nd century AD to the 9th century is when these places are in existence, right? And then you've got to jump through a dark century after the Battle of Clontarf, and then you're getting into the kind of 11th and 12th century when we're beginning to kind of calm down and get a bit more organized and a bit more civilized. And then that's when the invasion happens. And I think people are looking back to these locations as a kind of a golden age, right? Because you have this wonderful story, almost like these Viking stories of, the mighty sagas of Iceland and Greenland. It's much more evocative and imaginative when you're hearing those stories and knowing that this is your locality. And maybe people have the same investment. But I heard lots of stories about, a guy who destroyed a fort and he was killed in the same place on a tractor. And that's a true story. But, whether there's a connection, I'm not sure. It doesn't really quite strike me as probable. But I do know that like up to maybe in the 50s in Ireland, there was a type of dark magic, which was called pishogri, which was where people would, if you didn't like somebody, there was all these kind of arcane kind of rituals of like, using animals and curdling milk, and souring milk, and using eggs and all this type of stuff where you're trying to invoke this kind of dark magic force to curse these people, right? And that's kind of like the dark side of the saints, right? Because saints don't you don't have a saint of like, sticking it to your neighbor, right?
But there are a lot of saint stories that end up kind of not so much sticking it to your neighbor, but there is like saints get a little bit rowdy, and there's some, I mean, like striking people with, like muteness, blindness, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's more like, I think, like actions in the saint's life. I'm not sure. I don't know, because I'm not Catholic, so I don't know like how they play out in your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I know there's plenty of, like, because they're particularly attached or touched by God, those that, you know, go out of the way to oppose the saints, bad stuff happens to them. But that's usually, I don't know, divine judgment on those that oppose the saints.
Yeah. Rather than weaponizing the saints, right? And then
Mhm.
using it to expand your holding, or, you know, kill all the cattle of your neighbor because you don't like them, right?
Mhm.
You know, so there's that aspect of the kind of the Celtic folklore and Celtic religion kind of remains right up to the 1940s and 50s, really, you know, subtly, but it's there.
Was there something specific that happened that kind of put that to an end? Like, was there like a particular move in like Irish, like, I don't know, like politics or culture to kind of like leave them behind?
I think just modernization transferred it. Like what could have happened was a kind of a winnowing of the population down. So in the 1950s, the population of the southern part of Ireland gets down to something like 1.5 or 1.6 million. It's something tiny.
Oh,
You know, and then like in the northern part of the country, there might have been another million. But basically, you're talking about, like, let's say 2.2 or 2.5, something like that in the whole island, right? Where, but approximately 1 century before that, there would have been about 8 million people. So it's kind of population collapse. So it could be that simply the culture was thinned out too much. And then, you know,
okay.
the 60s have a kind of a resurgence, and the 70s are reasonably okay. The 80s are a fucking mess, but that's another thing. But
That's everywhere.
yeah, that's just,
I know the fact that you said the 40s and 50s really struck me, because like Cale Zeldin's been talking a lot about how sort of the cultural transformation that we're in, that I think he thinks is about to be like uncovered. He keeps saying like all the bodies are buried in the mid-centuries, like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s.
So this is kind of something that I've been interested in about before. I've always I kind of run on the idea that for the last period of time, Ireland runs at a different chronology, or on a different timeline to other places. So, like, you know,
Literally, this is one of the reasons Dracula, the book, was written, was because I think Bram Stoker was trying to convince them to get on the same time zone as the rest of the UK.
Yeah. So that didn't work out, right? He failed on that one. But like the 1990s for Ireland is the 1970s for other parts of Europe.
Okay.
It's maybe like the 1960s for Quebec, or the point of turning where things unravel very fast, and that begins to change radically in the 90s for Ireland, because there's the container of the Cold War, and the Cold War is a container around the conflict in the northern part of Ireland, and the conflict in the northern part of Ireland is a thing which sinks deep into the country and holds people to a certain way of being, living, tradition. And when the Cold War breaks down, the ending of the Cold War and the end of the conflict are not separable things, right? They're two related things. And that container begins to pull away. And then the war and the conflict in the north begins to pull away. And all of these patterns of seeing yourself through the long lens of 8 centuries begins to weaken. And then it's this new world of globalization, and a lot of those things get swept away fast and hard. I think in like why there was a kind of a major not the 40s in Ireland, no, not the 40s. I should be more careful. I'd say it's probably more the 60s and 70s that this begins to break down, maybe the 80s. The 80s through simple, just immiseration because so many people are having to emigrate because the economy's a mess. So I kind of feel like this was kind of battered to death as opposed to dying softly, right? You know.
Yeah, yeah. It's wild to think of you guys going through such a desiccated population at the same time that, in America we have the baby boom. It's just completely different experiences of the same kind of like time zone.
Yeah. Different, like like we weren't involved in World War II. We had our fill of war, so we were like, we're going to sit this one out, guys, and that was not well appreciated. The Marshall Plan and the post World War II consensus. So it's like we had 5 years of economy turned off, and then when we tried to turn it back on, it was like everybody's like, "Nah, we're busy." build up Germany and France and Holland and Italy and all this type of stuff. So that kind of threw things out. And
the problem of like suffering, but not really. I mean, the entire continent is in triage, and you're just going through like, I don't know, like a stagnation or something like that.
It's pretty bleak stagnation, but because there wasn't much flowing beforehand, so the stagnation was. We opted out of World War II, Matsy. Matsy asks that we got to opt out of World War II. We got to opt out of World War II because we felt there was a strange dichotomy of if we were going to side with the country that had just ended its occupation of us 20 years earlier, which had to be ended by a war, that this would seem like a strange, who were we supporting, right? And who were we fighting for? Was it optional? No, I think it was more by chance because the conflict was to the east of Ireland, England, France, Germany. If we were between England and Germany, it wouldn't have been optional. We would have got locked in, right? But the British had the northern part of Ireland, so they were able to use that to control the north of the Atlantic, along with Scotland. So they didn't need the rest of Ireland. But if history had gone a different way, they would have rolled back in and invaded the whole country. So it was more like by chance than support need reason not to. That was the conflict, right? People felt that, and also the northern part of Ireland was still under control of the British. So it was, people didn't have much enthusiasm to kind of dig up the guns and then start supporting the neighbors, right? And a lot of people anyway volunteered and ended up fighting. It was like 30 or 40,000 people still mobilized and went with the British.
Right.
One thing about the 1950s that kind of strikes me is, so you remember, so Michael Collins, maybe not. There was this movie in the 90s and 2000s, Michael Collins, Liam Neeson's in it.
Yep, Liam Neeson.
He's one of
Sandra Bullock? No, Julia Roberts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So not in the movie, but in actual history, Michael Collins visits the town that I'm from, and he goes to the church, and he has a postcard, and he sends a picture of he sends the postcard to some friend, and I've seen the postcard, and it is the most ornate tabernacle, like really like continental quality marble. Just, hey, Jad, how are you doing, man? Just a beautiful tabernacle. And this gets all sledgehammered down in the 1950s and early 60s as part of Vatican II, I suppose, right? But there was that hard break of, and it's just like total destruction, man. And then afterwards, it was almost like a church of a different faith, right? Kind of a more kind of like, don't worry about the beauty, just kind of focus on the word faith, right? Whereas previously to that, it was actually quite, I'm trying to be delicate here, right? But prior to that, it was more like, I was like going into a cathedral, even though it's a small church. And I wonder, did that play a kind of an element of why the fairy faith and the kind of folklore mythology kind of got pushed away, right? Because in any body or that would tolerate the destruction of something so beautiful and the replacement of it with something so anodyne and boring would be so rationalist and kind of, almost like Bauhaus architectural, like, let's make it beautiful by pouring concrete and rebar, right? This mentality. So there was some shift began to manifest in Ireland there as well, right?
Yeah. I was just or Matsy and I talked recently with a scholar who's done a lot of work in she's an Inkling scholar, so we talked a little bit about Charles Williams and sort of, but she's also, I think she did her doctorate on sort of like esoteric elements in like 20th century playwrights or something like that. Basically, like how many folks who were doing like, anyway, like, but basically one of the things that she kind of interacts with a lot is this idea of like the disenchantment thesis. Mm-hmm. And as I did a little bit of reading, prepping for that conversation, I read this book, The Myth of Disenchantment. And it's just kind of like shocking and stunning how much disenchantment is a story that really doesn't seem to have any basis in history at all. It's almost like, I know, like the noble lie that all of the pagans are telling in order to justify continuing to do, like, try and become sorcerers and stuff like that. But it's just, and it doesn't recognize that it doesn't fit into the clean boundaries of, I don't know, like word-based Protestantism versus image-based Catholicism. It's, I don't
know. One of the things I've been, trying to get a handle on was some of the romantics stuff. So I read an abridged version of this book by Rousseau, and apparently it's like an 800-page monster. So the abridged version I read was like 30 minutes. So when they say abridged, it was like they chopped it down to next to nothing, right? But but it was interesting, and I'm reading Young Werther now by Goethe, and it's actually quite accessible and interesting. Oh, here's Chad. Hello, Chad. It's also quite a, hey, how are you doing, man? It's also a nice book, and it's very easy to get into. But like looking at these books, I'm really struck by how the novelty is that all these rich guys who've gone out into the valleys and all to these places to live their best lives come across ordinary people just doing their thing, and the guy can't stop but talk about, like, how that person has a wonderful life, and I wish I could have what they have. It's like, dude, you're living in like 1750 and you're staying out in a valley somewhere in, I don't know, supposed to be Switzerland, right? And even then there's this loss of, like, that's enchantment. He looks at the poor and who are living their lives, and he thinks their lives are enchanted because they're integrated with life, right? And I'm kind of baffled by this. So if there is this enchantment, disenchantment, and maybe that's just the wrong word, Matt, but there does seem to be some type of thing where people lost access to see the world that way.
Maybe it's just money, just the fact that these are rich kids who don't know how to handle being rich, and they feel so cut off because they experience no serious financial constraints.
Yeah, meaning crisis 101, right?
Too. Just in general, like, it may be wherever I'm not, I wish I was.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that can happen between people at any given stage in their life. The restless spirit of man.
And in those two books, Chad, like, that restlessness and that kind of discontentment is the central theme. Like, because that book, the New Eloise, whatever it's the New Eloise Julie or something, and she has a situation where she has to marry a rich man, but she's in love with another person, right? And her life kind of forces her in such a way that to keep her family happy, to keep her house, and to keep her life well, and not to mess up that guy's life who she's in love with, she eventually marries the older guy, and he's a nice guy, and she has a great life. She has family, and she loves the kids, and she gets injured trying to protect the kids, And then at the very end, she turns around, writes a letter to the young buck from 20 years ago and goes, "Oh yeah, by the way, I always loved you, right? And I still loved you." And at the core, there was like this tension of, should she be discontented when she has everything, right? She's got somebody who loves her. She's got a beautiful family and a good life, right? But she's still discontented because she wanted to have the one perfect romance. And she wished it was just that way. And then young Werther is this, but like on steroids, right? Because the guy is like intelligent and he's friendly and he gets on with people. And he meets this in one of the scenes which kind of struck me was he meets this young man, and this young man is staying with the widow, and he's probably a laborer on the farm, and he's in love with this widow, and she has no idea he's in love with her. And the very next day, young Werther meets the girl he falls in love with, and I think he just wants to go, you know what? Now I've got my love story as well, because the chances that one love story in this book is immediately followed by the main character falling in love with the lady who's central to the story, it just seems a bit too random. And again, it's that lack of kind of like wanting to be the main character, which is a kind of a disillusion as well, right? Discontentment.
Yeah, and again, it's just the human problem of like the situation you've imagined in your mind is always more perfect and more fulfilling than the actual realities, because you have to deal with more than just the fantasy. You have to deal with the laundry and the dishes and the this and the that, and the fact that sometimes it's boring talking to the same person for 15 hours in the day.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that weird about these books is there's this kind of powerlessness in these books, and these are kind of like keystone books for the romantics. Like the first lady, she wants to kind of marry the young buck, and she even gets given an option to do it, but she doesn't want to disrespect her parents and go live somewhere else and kind of scandalize them. And then the other, like Werther, is always talking about how he's a bit depressed and how his life is a bit rough, and how he's not able to really be creative, and he can't do anything about it. Like he's on a doom loop, right? So there's this kind of strange oddity that these people are discontent, but have absolutely no way to figure out how to turn the ship around and sail down a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, that's very much like the Rousseau thing of like the problem is society. It's everyone and all of their constraints upon me. And if I could only be unshackled from convention, I could truly be free to express myself.
And he was a poor lad, apparently. His dad was a watchmaker, so he probably was reasonably okay, but he wasn't as fancy as all the people he was hanging around with, right? And I wonder, is there a type of resentment in how he sees the world, right, and how he kind of begins to paint it, And does that then kind of feed into this idea of being free in the romantics,
Yeah. It's a lot to, I don't know, like the spiritual virtue of learning to be content regardless of your situation. But so many artists are not content, and they use that to fuel their art, which generally I'm in favor of. Like if you're going to be sad, be sad about something that caused you to write something that moves me. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
There's this book that I keep going back to because I just find it so compelling. The writing is so great. Most people probably wouldn't like it, but it's called The Passenger. And one of the characters in there, she seems to have like maybe schizophrenia or something. It's not really established what it is that she's dealing with. But one of her the spirits that visits her often says this thing to her. He says, "Choice is the name of the thing that you have," and it's like that's this idea of like too much choice is the name of this illness that she is dealing with. And I think about this. I don't know, like I don't really ever have this kind of like longing for a different life. I think I did when I was younger. As I've grown older, the longing to be a different person or have a different life seems completely absurd to me and
Yeah,
disgusting.
yeah, I agree. What strikes me is that um, while I have longed to have a different life in certain ways, um, the pace of change in my life over the last 5 or 6 years is all central to the fact that I have not the ability to change my life, right? You
Hmm.
see, without the constraint, the wanting to have the extra life, the different life is fantasy. The tackling of the constraint that your life is the opportunity for growth. It's more visceral and real, right? It's actually something I can play with, right? Whereas the rest of it is just like fucking daydreaming, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't much benefit to me.
And it's scary. The daydreaming is scary because like I look at my I was talking with Ann last night about this, about how I come from a family on both sides of my family that are runners. Like they they just change their run off with somebody else and move away or get divorced or whatever the thing is. And I'm like talking with Ann and I'm just like, man, the odds for us are just so bad. If I look at the historical numbers, the odds for us are horrible. And and so, like, knowing that is kind of interesting because it's like I will do whatever it takes for that to not happen. You know, I look at like what would life have been like had my grandfather not? Uh, and see, even I'm doing it now, right? I'm daydreaming about a thing that might have been or was. But what would it have been like had my grandfather not ran off with his secretary and left my dad and with divorced their mom, like all this stuff. Like how different would the universe be had that sort of thing not happened? And, but that's also why I like literature because literature is very good for being able to tell these stories. So I have to live them.
Peterson had a line about something along the lines of that, where he said that you can be the person that breaks the chain, and that was I mean it's a simple line, like, but if you ponder like what you're talking about, or what I'm sure many people can sit down and think about and kind of go, oh, I see a chain, all right, and the idea that you can be the person that breaks the chain is pretty pretty heavy idea.
Yeah. And but also that's the sort of thing where like if you see that as the great spiritual adventure for your life, and that's something that also is going to create benefits that are going to pass down to your children. I mean, that's a worthy thing to spend your life on, is trying to break that chain in a way where it does not come back to like bite future generations, sort of like a generational exorcism you're trying to accomplish.
Mhm. And then you become the grandfather, right? And then and the grandchild
The
in
one that,
like
the one,
80.
yeah, that's really it, right? I want to be the grandfather that I wish I had.
Hmm.
Did
Yeah,
you
it's a
know
noble
him?
goal.
Did you know him, Chad, or he was never
Yeah,
present in your life?
yeah. No, I knew him, um, and but like when I look back at my father, my grandfather, his father, all those, there's like the history, the family history is so like there's so little known because of how distant it had grown, like it fractured down. Same thing was named after my grandmother who adopted my mother. So there's like these kinds of patterns. And we looked at we ended up eventually finding out the history of my mother's uh, blood family, and it's a mess. But yeah, I mean, and it wasn't because these guys were like incapable. or maybe it was. Maybe they were incapable. Maybe they were unwilling or incapable of being honest men. I don't know. Like I try not to. It'd be easy for me to sit on like a judgment throne and be like, these guys are like, horrible. And part of me feels like that, but also part of me has to kind of like, in the same way that I can look at my daughter and see kind of like my inner life in her, I can also imagine the things that my father and my grandfather were dealing with, but didn't have the tools to address, or were unwilling to. But it's like everything else. At the end of the day, this is going to come down to submission and intention, and it's not about me and my comforts.
I think as well, like that, the benefit of having that long frame, of being able to kind of see into the future and kind of hope. Like I know, and that, because I think that's actually a benefit. Like it's not just like about like how can I give, but also to kind of like that allure of being that figure in 70 years time, right? Where kind of people go and on this rock something was founded, right? That something grew out from this. There was a turning point, and multiple generations of stability came from that. I think that's kind of a nice goal to have. And I think maybe that appeals to the human spirit or to the ego, right? To kind of go, I want to be that figure, and I kind of like that approach, and I kind of sometimes see it as separate to actually kind of having to frame it in terms of spirituality or religion, which is probably not ideal, but that's anyway
Well,
where I'm coming from.
my father talked a lot about legacy, and I mean, and his legacy is not good, but that's what he always like, talked about wanting to give his family legacy. So I don't know, like I think in some sense I will end up leaving my family sooner than I would like. I probably won't live as long as I would like to. I might not see my own grandchildren. So that's kind of breaks my heart. So in some way, maybe there's no way around this. Uh, the legacy of the leader.
Mm.
But that's why I also am trying to establish that let my daughter and my wife know that I love them dearly and I want to be a good father and a good husband, even if I kick the bucket earlier than that, then it would be desirable. But
Chad, you're sorry, Matt, you were going to say?
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Chad, one of the things, like when I was, looking in a bit around places in Europe, was I noticed how many churches have statues of Saint Joseph all over the place, and I can't remember where I saw that. Oh, actually, I think it was maybe, yeah, there was a guy he was talking to, actually, Paul, and he was a guy from Holland, and he was talking to Paul, and he ended up talking about Saint Joseph. And I can't remember did he touch on this, or I began to kind of think a bit about it. Doesn't matter, I suppose. That like Joseph is the guy who vanishes. He is the patron saint of just being there and almost getting nothing for it, right? In a way, like he gives, and he's gone. We don't even know what happens to him, right? And then when I was going to all of these churches, and I see him over and over and over again, and and then I'm thinking, but it's got to be there for a reason. They're not just pro forma sticking that statue up there because he's Saint Joseph. They're putting it there because it resonates with people. That idea of I'm giving, and I don't get to see the final story. I don't get to find out what happens with my own two eyes. And I thought that was a very poignant when I began to see it through that lens. Every time I'd see a statue of him, I'd be like, oh man, this is tough, like.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Like he initially is kind of known for being the guy who who steps up once he realizes what's actually going on in the situation with Mary. But also, like, after he does his job, like, he disappears entirely from the story. So he's a total absence when Christ is an adult. But he's an absolute presence in the churches themselves through, like, statuary and icons and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a painting I saw, which is Mary. Mary and Jesus, and they're sitting on a rock, and they're playing and they're relaxing and having fun. And you know, the difficulty of the journey is set aside for one moment, and it's just a sweet scene between mother and child. And then walking your way around the corner is an old man with a white hat, and he's leading the donkey away, right? Probably to, you know, rest it or whatever. And that's Joseph, right? So even in this painting, he's just like, you know, exit stage left, a job to be done. I'm just going to walk around the rock. They're having fun. They're living a good life. They're having a nice time. But somebody's got to water that donkey. Because
Dad's putting gas in the car.
He's putting gas in the car, right? You know, Dad's going to be back because Dad's got to do a job, right? And it's subtle, man, you know, and it's subtle and it's brutal at the same time. It's lovely.
Yeah, that's what Nick.
Oh,
Am I
did we lose him?
Okay, yeah, maybe.
Put a position such as that.
Chad, will you will you say that again? You froze for a second.
Nick was talking about the shadow patriarchy. That is Joseph, St. Joseph, like the brotherhood of Joseph. And at the very least, if you are going to assume the role of a father, at the very least, one could hope for that, to be that kind of a father, at the very least.
Yes, agreed. Chad, I saw somebody with a sleep token T-shirt yesterday. I can't remember where it was, and I was walking by and he had a sleep token, and I was almost about to go, sleep token, I know sleep token. And then I thought, oh no, they've got like 1 million views on their videos. He'd probably like, yeah, there's a lot of us here, so I just left it be. But yeah, I saw sleep token. It's like, in the wild.
I don't know why I love it so much. It's just so lush. The music is just so lush. And there's poetry, and there's mystery, and it's masculine, and the kind of masculinity that I like to, that I've embodied, you know, I can relate to that, even though, you know, it's a little simpish. It's fine. Yeah, I dig it. But I mean, I also like, you know, other stuff. So, but I love some stuff. Hey, Jer, are you writing for the little zine?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I could do. I could do. I have been published before by them.
It's true.
I was a paid piece. Matt paid me. I think you paid nobody else, Matt. There was a healthy stipend.
Write better, man. What can I say?
Yeah.
Got to reward the quality.
Write better.
To be fair, the exchange rate between here and Ireland is very favorable, so I was out like $5.
Yeah. I bought a house with it, and he lost $5. It all worked. It all worked sweet.
I think that the writing that we did was great. Just saying. I still haven't gotten your word on it, but that's okay. Sorry, I'm a little spicy.
Apologies. It's been an insane work week and a half for me.
It's okay. But the next one is vacation.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're just riding the Odyssey's coattails, and the fact that the Odyssey's coming out in summer means that you can read Odyssey as journey, as vacation, as road trip. If you want to fight a monster, fight a monster. It's
You
I haven't.
So the theme is the Odyssey, is it?
Yeah, and you like do it as loosely as you like. I mean, I love "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" as an adaptation of the Odyssey. Um, so if you want to write about monsters, fighting Cyclops or whatever, if you want to talk about coming home, but the biggest thing is like for me, like what made it so clear is like both Odyssey it's a road trip in the middle of summertime, which at least for America is very much like the time where you hit the open road and go camping and stuff like that. So journey, adventure, it's all inbounds.
Excellent.
Yeah, sounds cool. Chad, Matsy wants to
Yeah.
know what are your thoughts on fairy, on the world of mythology and fairies?
I don't have a lot of thoughts on it, only because I haven't really thought much about it. I haven't done any research on fairies. Um, but I mean, I'm not against them or anything like that. But I think I suppose I should probably get back on topic. That's probably what he's actually saying. Like, get back to the fairy discussion. So yeah, I should probably.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm not subtle enough. Yeah, maybe he okay, yeah, maybe that was the subtext. I don't know. I didn't spot that. I
I
just saw the comment.
halfway yes, but I think really just curious what you think. We don't think
I
you've
think so.
spoken on folklore.
I,
Do you have a favorite North American cryptid, Chad?
what does that mean?
Like Bigfoot or some other more obscure local
Well,
guy? Yeah, is there? Do you? Who's your local like Bigfoot?
Elvis.
Is there like a Wisconsin Bigfoot?
No, Elvis.
Elvis?
Elvis. Yeah, like Elvis isn't dead. Like my favorite cryptid are like the so-called celebrities that fake their death. So Tupac, Elvis.
Oh, okay.
That's my favorite kind of folklore.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's like the the undead, right? I mean, people just can't accept that they're dead, right? But
Well, for me, it's actually deeper than that. It's actually like an American spirit. It's the American spirit of that which lives on through the essence of the great American dream. That to me is what that actually is.
Uh, I do actually probably really be really interesting to dial back to one of my favorite words, chthonic. Um, just because I know I find that like chthonic religion really interesting, really fascinating. Nietzsche in his was his dissertation about like Wagner or whatever, where he distinguishes the Apollonian from the Dionysian, and talks about the Apollonian is, which I guess is probably like the McGilchrist left brain right brain split of, you're ordered, you're rational, you're reason based, you're all about harmony versus like the Dionysian, which is the absolute like brawler party boy. Um, and I don't know, I've always been more. It's not hard for me, I guess, probably as a Protestant, to imagine what an Apollonian Christianity is, but I don't really know what a Dionysian or a Christianity that leans into the Dionysian, what that looks like, if
yeah,
that's even possible, or if that's just a contradiction in terms.
I mean, I think the Dionysian is also more feminine,
Mm-hmm.
and uncontrolled and rejuvenative,
Mm-hmm.
and the Apollonian is like all the things you mentioned as well, but also masculine and maintaining, right? And the kind
Yep.
of why would you go ahead and f this up, right? It works. We're going to maintain it. And
Yep.
Dionysian is like, oh, we're gonna get off big time because that's what we're gonna do, right? So, like, would that be the kind of the 12th century kind of like? So there's I read a book about the medieval world, and they had stories about in Paris, where at some point people started to dance almost
Mm-hmm.
spontaneously, and just
Mm-hmm.
like for a couple of weeks, were continuously dancing until people were collapsing. I mean,
Or laughing.
And laughing and all this type of stuff, you know. That's as probably Dionysian,
Yeah.
almost full on Dionysian,
Oh,
right? No, they didn't rip anybody to pieces, like, you know, but they were like all over the place in their energy, right?
Yeah, but
yeah.
isn't that the road to Emmaus too? Kind of.
How do you mean,
I don't
You
John?
know, like where Jesus is like walking down the road next to these guys and they can't recognize him, and they're kind of crying about like what, and then he's like, well, what happened? What are you guys crying about? To me, it kind of is a similar. It's similar.
Yeah, I think so. Like it's there's this type of subversiveness there, right? Whereas the Apollonian would have been him just kind of coming straight out and saying, "Look, here I am," right? You know, give it to you straight, right? Whereas there's a kind of a hiddenness about it, and a kind of you know, disrupting the party or disrupting the dinner at the you know, later in the inn, right? He just kind of goes and kind
Yeah,
Well, he
I mean,
does
very
that
much so. Like
post
the Apollonians in the light,
crucifixion.
the Dionysians in the dark.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, he does the Dionysian post crucifixion. I'm
I
kind
mean,
of losing you guys. I gotta. Sorry.
all right, thanks, Chad. Take care, man. God bless. Bye.
yep, yep.
And I think as well, Matt, there's that question of, you know, that character who had proposed that the early Christian masses were all centered around Dionysian rituals with the wine and the, what's it called, egg rot or something, I can't remember, with that type of yeast or some type of fungus which kind of
Oh, is
creates.
that the psychedelic thing that they claimed caused like the Salem witch trials or whatever?
Yeah,
everyone got like hopped up on.
Yeah, hopped up on rotten wheat, and then just went crazy, right? And that's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, what is the equivalent of kind of being left go, right? That's the kind of Dionysian thing. It's like, right, cut loose. You know, I mean,
yeah. Or even like, you know, like the first Pentecost. They all rush out on the street speaking in tongues, and the first thing people say is like, everybody is drunk.
Yeah.
Now, granted, that is like a bit of a misapprehension, because it's not a full kind of like cutting loose, but I don't know, like the Apostle Paul in like Ephesians all talks about like, don't, like, he's got this like, he says, don't get drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. And the question is, are those opposites or those two deep similarities? Because again, like when he says don't get drunk with wine, he's not just saying like don't have a glass of wine with dinner. He's saying don't go to the bacchanalian violent revels that, you know, have a couple corpses by the end of the night.
Yeah. Don't lose control, but become intoxicated, kind of, in a way, is what he's saying as well, right?
Yeah. Or
that intoxication strikes me as being very not of, depends on what tradition you're coming from, but the process of intoxication seems to be somewhat outside of the desired outcome for certain churches. I kind of couldn't imagine that there's a reason like the charismatic movement splits off. There's a reason like all of these movements are kind of forming even within the Catholic Church, and they kind of, you know, form over here and they form over there, because they're tending to get a bit more boisterous, a bit more, you know, energized. I came across these people when I can't remember where we were. Oh, it doesn't matter. And there was some Spanish movement, and it was in Italy, and they were just singing, and they had a mass in the square in Pisa, I think it was, and they had a mass there, and they just got into a big circle, and they were all singing and swaying, and there was people with their kids, and I had been sitting with my family further down a square, and I could hear a bit of noise, right, and I kind of, you know, get like short attention sometimes. So I just like, okay, I'm going to be back in 10 minutes, right? Order me a beer. And then I went down and I walked around. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in a long time, because they were all just dancing there, like old people, young people, children. And it was just lovely, you know. And that kind of felt a bit bacchanalian, or not bacchanalian, but Dionysian, because it had that kind of sense of, there was a sense of release in it, right? You know, people were no longer caring as to whether they were or were not dancing on the street.
This happened to me 2 days ago. I was doing balloons for a big festival, and there's a bunch of Christians that decided to do that on my street corner, and I was so angry with them because they sucked up all of the attention in the street corner, and I'm just like, I can't work with you guys here. So it was a pretty big corner, so I like just kind of like edged away sort of slightly without, a little bit of like a noise buffer. And they just kept like circling around like the block like Jaws, just with their little like acoustic guitars. And I'm just like, I can't work in these conditions. Because but that was also a little bit like, again, it's outside of like social norms. So it's just, they're unpredictable.
Yeah. And that, like, to play on that outside of the type of norm, I remember reading an account of masses in the medieval period, and I've not read many accounts of masses in the medieval period, so I don't know how true this is, but that apparently in the middle, people would continuously be getting up and going to various devotional corners, right? So the trainedness of sitting there and looking forward, the bookness of the schooledness of looking forward was absent in them, and they were just kind of like, no, that's it, man, I'm going over here to the devotional corner, you do what you're doing, I'm going to be back to you, keep on rocking. And then they'd go away and they come back, and people were continuously in motion. So there's something very disordered about it as well. And I suppose to the extent of this various little kind of flotilla type thing representing this kind of effervescence or bubbling up is a type of disorderedness, right? Because the centering principle is very strong and very weak here at the same time, right? And in that sense, it's almost like the equivalent of people just randomly getting out of one seat, walking across to the other one, and just ignoring the man at the top doing his thing, but still participating within the same thing. And I wonder, is part of the discomfort and questioning that sometimes people have about, like, what does this all mean, is simply a reflection of the fact that we're less Apollonian than we were trained to be. And we're finding ourselves becoming a bit more Dionysian than we know how to handle or something, right?
Something like that. I don't know. I mean, part of that's like, I'm just PBK's whole kind of like metagelical thing is just, no, there are not quite rigid, but there are clear containers that we all allegedly belong to. But we're like, no, we want to go swirl over here. We want to like go back and forth. These containers that we allegedly are in, we are proving through our continuing to hang out with each other how porous they are.
Yeah. And maybe that's the Dionysian part of it, right? We actually, I wouldn't say should be doing that, but if we are doing that, then that is a kind of recreating of containers, right? We're testing the containers to see if there's a deeper container, like, ever inwards, ever upwards, right? To find out if there's another container that's stronger, more malleable, and fits better and doesn't bump against our edges.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think we forget around here is, like, most of us here, we're pretty weird, and we're generally on the fringes of the religious communities that we belong to. So we're already on the boundary, I think, for most of us. It's part of the reason why all of our other friends are like, I don't understand why you guys do this. You're so strange. And it's true.
Yeah. Vanguard, Matt. Vanguard. Matt, I'm running out of mental energy.
It's all good. I gotta go update my parking soon anyway, so this is perfect timing.
Thank you very much for
Can you read the title of that book again? I do want to look that up.
Oh yeah, sure. It is Evan Wentz. Here it is that readable or is that in? Yeah, it is. No, it's not. It's in Mirror, is it?
The fairy faith
In Celtic countries,
in Celtic
and
countries.
the author is W.Y. Evans,
Mm.
Evans, Wentz, Wentz, and that's
Yeah.
probably free to download because it was originally printed like 1911, so it should be out of copyright.
Yeah. No, I took Peugeot had a course with Martin Shaw a year or two ago, and he basically went through like a series of weeks of kind of like Celtic Christian kind of like wonder tales. Shouldn't dig up some of that material and retread it with you sometime.
Yeah.
Like he gave us their telling of the coming of the Tuatha De Danann, the birth of Oisin, a couple stories of Finn McCall, and what's the big one? Diarmid and Grania as well.
Yeah.
That one wrecked me. Voyage of St. Brendan.
Yeah, I got a book, a Dutch it's in Dutch, right? And it's their account from the like 13th or 14th century of the voyage of St. Brendan, and it's I can read some modern Dutch, but it was hard work, right? So I gave it to my neighbor, and he fucking loves it. He's just reading the whole thing, so he's getting. I'm spreading out the tentacles slowly but surely. But, okay, I better head away, Matt. Take care.
All right, have a great one, man. See ya.
And Matt, yeah, cool, man. That would be nice. I would like that as well. I'm on the Discord as well. Okay. All right. Take care, guys. Thanks very much. All right. Have a good one. Bye. How do I turn it off?